I saw it before anyone else did. The smoke, the silence before the storm, and the weight of knowing that no one would believe me. Hey, before we begin, how are you doing today? I don't mean in that quick, polite way. I mean really. How's your heart been? Because mine still carries a scar from a morning I can't forget. June 24th, 1876. I was just a scout back then. Young, fast, proud to wear the braid of the Arikara. They called me Red Star. I rode for the U.S. Cavalry, but my blood, it belonged to the plains. That night we were 12. 6 Arikara, 4 Crow, 2 white interpreters, and we were the only eyes Custer had in the dark. We rode ahead while 600 men slept behind us. You ever try to scream a warning and feel your voice vanish before it reaches anyone? I did. I screamed in the language of smoke and zigzag trails, in signs and speed and blood rushing through my ears. But they didn't listen. He didn't listen. What happened next? It wasn't a battle. It was a mistake. A mistake we saw coming, and a silence we've carried for far too long. So let me tell you what really happened. Not from books, not from glory songs, but from the saddle, from the dust, from me. I'm Red Star, and this is what I saw the night before they died. Let's begin. It started with the sound of hoofbeats, not loud, not frantic, just steady. 12 of us moving through the dark like shadows stretched thin across the prairie. The firelight from camp flickered behind us, a warm glow we would not see again until morning, if at all. My name is Red Star, and I was the youngest among the Arikara scouts. That night, Crooked Horn led our group, and I rode just behind him, close enough to see the tension in his shoulders. No one spoke. Even the Crow Scouts, usually talkative with hand signs and jokes, stayed silent. We knew what rode beside us. Not just responsibility, but the weight of being ignored. We'd seen it before. Our warnings carried less weight than the shine on an officer's boots. The air was cool against my skin, and the sky had no moon. Perfect for moving unseen, but it made the land feel heavier somehow, like the stars were too far to care what happened down here. Custer had told us the plan as if it were fact, like the future was already printed on a map. Find the Dakota, count their lodges, ride back. Simple. But the way he looked at us when he spoke, it wasn't trust. It was calculation. We weren't people to him. We were tools. And when a tool breaks, you replace it. You don't mourn it. Ahead of us, the Crow riders signaled a turn. We veered left, following the curve of Rosebud Creek, its waters invisible but close whispering against the rocks. My horse breathed slow beneath me. Trained, disciplined, like me. But I could feel it too, the unease, like the land itself was holding its breath. We stopped once to rest. No fire, just a circle of bodies and eyes scanning the black horizon. Someone lit a smoke, passing it around in silence. When it reached me, I inhaled deeply, not for the tobacco, but for the ritual. In that breath, I reminded myself that I was not just a scout. I was the eyes of my people. And if we failed tonight, 600 men behind us might not see another sunrise. One of the Crow Scouts pointed to a high ridge far ahead. That was our destination. From there, we would see what the soldiers could not. From there, we would know. And still, as we mounted up again, I felt something settle into my chest. Not fear, not yet. Something else, like hearing your name in a dream. Faint, familiar, but wrong. I tried to shake it off, that strange feeling curling beneath my ribs. Maybe it was just the cold. Maybe it was something else. Crooked Horn didn't look back, but I could tell he felt it too. His hand stayed close to his rifle the rest of the ride. Every sound in the night, every shift in the wind made my ears sharpen. A coyote cried somewhere to the west. Then nothing. Just the soft thump of hooves in dirt and the occasional creak of leather as someone shifted in the saddle. We passed a fallen tree, its branches twisted like broken fingers. I remember thinking it looked like a warning, like the land had tried to speak before we did. The Crow riders moved ahead with confidence. This was their homeland. Their blood ran through the soil here, and still even they stayed low in the saddle. Even they rode like ghosts. At one point I looked up. The stars had shifted. Time was passing, but the ridge still looked far. I started counting my breaths just to keep focused. 1, 2, 3. Until I saw the lead scout raise his hand. We stopped. No one asked why. We just did. Ahead of us, the land began to rise. Not steep, but steady. Our goal was close. And as we stood there, quiet and still, the truth settled in. This was more than scouting. This was stepping into history before it knew it was history. We would reach the ridge by dawn, and what we saw from up there, what I saw, would try to change everything. But the hardest part wasn't finding the enemy. It was knowing they might already be watching us. We reached the base of the ridge just as the sky began to fade from black to deep blue. That slow creeping light that makes everything feel like it's holding its breath. We dismounted in silence. The horses needed rest. So did we, but no one said it. No one dared. I looked up at the slope in front of us. It wasn't tall by mountain standards, but in that moment it felt massive. Like climbing it would change something. Maybe it already had. Crooked Horn gestured. We moved single file, leading the horses by their reins, careful not to dislodge rocks or send sounds echoing down the valley. My boots crunched softly over gravel and dry grass. I counted each step without meaning to. 1, 2, 3. The air grew thinner near the top. Colder too. And then we were there, standing on the edge of something greater than any of us. From that height, I could see it all, rolling hills, river bends, and just beyond a ridge, smoke. Not one trail, dozens. Thin rising columns curling into the morning sky. I froze. My lungs forgot to work. My heart didn't. It pounded so hard I thought the Crow Scouts might hear it. I turned to Crooked Horn. He was already watching. He nodded once slow, like he'd expected it. Behind us, the rest of the group assembled. Someone muttered a prayer in Crow. Another pulled out tobacco. I didn't move. I just stared at those lines of smoke, my mouth dry, my hands cold. Those weren't cooking fires from a single family. That was a village. A big one. Maybe the biggest I'd ever seen. We were looking at the heart of the Dakota. I could feel it, and they were there just beyond that hill. Hundreds, maybe more. Horses, lodges, warriors, families. It was like standing at the edge of a storm before the wind hits. You can smell it, but you can't move. One of the Crow Scouts made an owl call. A soft, high whistle that drifted into the trees like it belonged there. But I knew what it meant. Enemy near. That call chilled something deep in my chest. It wasn't just that we'd found them. It was that they might have already found us. We all turned toward the sound. 2 of the Crow Scouts had gone farther up the ridge, and now they were running back toward us, fast hands signaling, eyes wide. One touched my shoulder as he passed a gesture we all knew it meant urgency, alliance, danger. Without a word, some of the Arikara began to sing, quietly, low and deep in the throat, victory songs. It was instinct, tradition, but one of the Crow Scouts turned sharply and motioned for silence, his finger pressed to his lips, then a quick slicing gesture across the air. Be quiet, be invisible. We obeyed. The two returning scouts gathered us in a tight circle. One knelt in front of Crooked Horn and began signing rapidly. His hands moved like wind. Mitch Byer, the interpreter, crouched beside him and translated barely above a whisper. Many lodges, many Dakota. They are close. That was all we needed. No numbers, no map, just the truth. Crooked Horn nodded, then turned to me. Your eyes, he said, are still young. Look again. I stepped forward. The sun was rising now, slowly pulling shadows back from the hills. I narrowed my eyes, looked past the smoke. Their movement. Small black dots on the plain. Horses. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. And behind them low shapes partly hidden by earth and trees. Lodges. I swallowed. I see it, I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. Smoke from many fires. Horses, too. Charlie Reynolds, the white scout we called Lucky Man, raised his field glasses. He stood still for a long time, then lowered them and scribbled something into a notebook. When I handed the folded paper to Crooked Horn, we all understood what it meant. This was it. We'd found them. Or maybe they had found us. Crooked Horn turned to me again. Saddle up, he said. You ride back. My heart jumped. I wasn't ready. I wanted to stay, to see more, to feel what came next, but I knew my role. I took the note and tucked it inside my jacket close to my heart. He pointed across the valley. See that smoke? That's our camp. Follow it home. Ride hard. Don't stop. I nodded, and I turned toward the ridge, toward the path that would carry my warning through morning light. I rode like the ground might split open behind me. The note pressed tight against my chest. Every beat of my heart reminded me what I carried. This wasn't just paper. It was proof. It was warning. It was everything we'd seen wrapped in one fragile fold that had to survive the ride. The wind bit at my face, and my horse responded to every nudge, galloping hard hooves pounded into the soft dirt like war drums. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Behind me was the ridge, the smoke, the silence of watchers we couldn't see. Ahead, Custer's camp. Somewhere past that bend in the earth, past the tall grasses and shallow ravines, men were still sharpening blades and joking around fires. They had no idea what waited for them beyond the horizon. I leaned forward, whispered to my horse without sound. Just breath. Faster. We need to move faster. At one point, Bull caught up beside me, riding hard. His horse struggled to match pace, its sides heaving. We didn't speak. We just rode. That silence between us was louder than anything. We reached the edge of a shallow ravine, and I guided my horse down, careful but quick. When we crested the other side, I saw them sentries posted near the perimeter of camp. I didn't hesitate. I raised my hand to my mouth and called out a signal. Not in English, not in words, but in a cry every Arikara scout knew. A call that meant I'm back. I have news. I rode in a zigzag, cutting across the open plain so that anyone watching would understand enemy located. Information confirmed. Then I did the last thing I'd promised before we left. I reached back and tied the tail of my horse. A simple knot. But one that told 100 years of warriors the mission was a success. The smoke from our camp rose straight into the sky, a thin line but clear. I followed it all the way in. My horse was drenched in sweat. So was I. As I slowed, I saw them gathering, faces turning, eyes narrowing. Bloody Knife stepped from his tent. His voice came quick and low. "Did you find them?" I nodded once. "Yes, it is a big camp." That was all he needed. He turned and called for Gerard, and then he came. Custer, blue coat, yellow hair under his hat, eyes already trying to read me like a map. His brother trailed behind him, quiet and unsure. Gerard translated while Custer watched me squat to catch my breath. My hands shook as I reached into my jacket and handed over the note. He read it, slowly. His face didn't change. Just a single nod. I waited. For praise. For command. For anything. But instead, he mocked his own brother. Called him scared. Said when we beat the Sioux, maybe then he'd become a man. And in that moment, I realized this man wasn't afraid. Not of what I'd seen. Not of what I'd carried across the prairie. He wasn't listening. Not really. Not yet. He stood, folded the note like it was a letter from home, and tucked it into his pocket as if the weight of it meant nothing. Then he looked at me, eyes sharp but distant, and through Gerard said, "Saddle up. We ride back. I want to see it myself." I blinked. I had just returned. My horse's flanks still heaved from the run. My throat was dry, my legs sore, but none of that mattered. Orders were orders. I nodded, stood and turned to my saddle. My hands moved on their own. Strap, buckle, tighten. The coffee I'd poured before arriving had gone cold, forgotten beside a rock. I knocked it over by accident as I moved. It spilled into the dirt. Just like the words I'd carried spilled and ignored. We rode out within the hour. Custer, his bugler, his brother Tom Gerard, the interpreter, and 3 other Arikara scouts, Bloody Knife, Bobtailed Bull, and Little Brave. I was with them too, of course, leading the way back toward the ridge. As we left, I heard a bugle call behind us. I didn't know what it meant. Preparation, maybe, or alert. All I knew was the hooves beneath me and the dust curling up around us. Custer stayed close behind me. At one point, he asked how far to the hill, and I raised my hand, pointed ahead. Not far. The sun was higher now. The land seemed flatter in the light, less dangerous, but that was the illusion of day. Shadows only get sharper when the light grows stronger. We reached the base of the ridge. I showed them where we had climbed. We dismounted. Began the climb again, this time with more weight. Not in gear, but in silence. Every step felt heavier, not because the hill had changed, but because now it carried expectation. At the top, the other scouts were still there, waiting. They had not left their post. Charlie Reynolds approached immediately and took Custer aside. They walked together to the same spot I had stood earlier, the place where I saw the smoke, where I saw the truth. Reynolds pointed. Custer looked, long, quiet. Gerard stood behind them, arms crossed, eyes following every shift. Then Gerard turned to the rest of us and said something I still don't understand fully. Custer says it's not a camp, he announced. He thinks it's just white rocks. White rocks. That's what he thought the lodges were. Reynolds shook his head, visibly frustrated. He pointed again, this time with force. "Look beyond the rocks," he said. "See the smoke. That's from cooking fires. That's a village." Custer adjusted his view, paused, said nothing. Then Reynolds handed him the field glasses. Custer looked through them for what felt like forever. When he lowered them, he gave the smallest nod. Not to us, not to Reynolds, to himself. A quiet admission, but not surrender. Never surrender. Not for him, not to us. Big Belly stood tall, his face carved with lines from sun and memory, and pointed at the horizon. Through the interpreter, his voice cut clean through the morning air. "You say they haven't seen us," he said, "but we saw their scouts, 6 of them. 2 crossed the ridge. 4 entered the woods. They're not shadows, they're real, and they're watching." Custer didn't flinch. He crossed his arms, glanced toward the ridge as if trying to will it quiet. Then he spoke through Gerard with a shrug that felt too casual. "I would welcome finding 2 dead Dakota scouts," he said. I felt something in my gut twist. It wasn't just the words, it was how lightly he said them. Like death was a tactic. Like our warnings were minor notes in his larger song. Crooked Horn stayed still beside me, but I could feel his breath tighten. Big Belly stepped closer, not threatening, just firm. "The Dakota never sleep with both eyes closed," he said. "They see more than this yellow hair thinks." His words weren't translated, but they didn't need to be. The tone was enough. Custer adjusted his gloves, looked over the valley again. Then with complete certainty he said, "They have not detected us. I will wait until nightfall. Then we surround them. We strike at dawn." That was it. That was the plan. It dropped over the group like a cold fog. The Crow Scouts exchanged glances. Even Charlie Reynolds seemed uneasy. The rest of us, we knew what that meant. We'd seen it before. When men believe the enemy sleeps, they step louder. And when they step louder, someone hears. Big Belly shook his head, slow and heavy. "This plan is flawed," he said. "Clear, direct, brave." I felt pride swell in my chest, watching him say what I didn't yet know how to voice. Custer didn't answer. He turned away. Decision made. Conversation over. I looked down the hill toward where the cavalry waited. Hundreds of soldiers tightening straps, counting bullets, laughing at something that wouldn't be funny by sundown. I wanted to scream, not in anger, in frustration. Because I knew. We knew. We had found the camp. We had seen the signs. We had done everything right. But the ones who made the decisions, they weren't listening. Not really. Not to us. Not to the land. Not to anything but themselves. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I started to wonder how many warnings does it take before silence is what kills you. The discussion didn't end. It simply dissolved. Like smoke from a fire no one admits is burning. Custer walked back toward his horse, issuing orders through Gerard, pretending nothing had been challenged. But we knew. We saw it in the way the scouts shifted their weight, in the way Charlie Reynolds held his silence a little longer than usual. There was doubt now, and it hung heavy over us. Big Belly wasn't finished. He stepped aside, speaking in Crow to the others, fast and forceful. Mitch Byer translated in hushed tones. "They've seen our smoke. Their scouts are ahead of us now. If we wait for nightfall, they'll be ready. They'll strike before we're in position. We must move today. We must take the horse herd." That caught Custer's attention. Barely. He turned back, frowning. Gerard waited for the words. Big Belly gestured again. "Strike now," he said. "Not the warriors, not the village, the horses. Without them they can't fight. They'll scatter. They'll hesitate. It will give you what you want advantage." I watched Custer's face. It didn't change, but I saw something behind the stillness. Not agreement, not yet, but consideration. For a brief second, it looked like he might listen. Really listen. Then came his answer. Yes, he said at last. It will be done as you suggest. His voice didn't match his words. It was too even, too smooth. The kind of agreement a man gives to end a conversation, not to change a plan. The scouts exchanged uneasy glances. No one believed him, not fully. Crooked Horn leaned toward me. He says yes, he whispered, but his eyes say no. We began descending the ridge to rejoin the main force. I walked beside Bloody Knife, his jaw set tight. He didn't speak, just stared forward like he was already watching the fight unfold in his mind. I looked back once just before we reached the flat. The ridge stood silent, but I imagined the smoke still rising beyond it. Still calling, still warning. The camp below bustled with movement. Soldiers adjusting packs, checking rifles, joking again, always joking. And I realized something that stuck in my bones. We weren't riding into a battle. We were riding into a memory that hadn't been written yet. Memory soaked in dust and blood and pride. One that would not be kind to the ones who tried to speak but were never truly heard. By midday, the sun sat high and hot above us, casting no shadow to hide in. Dust clung to the air, sweat to our skin. Orders moved quickly, now barked and relayed. The 7th Cavalry was dividing, just like that. 3 columns, 3 directions, 3 parts of a whole that should have stayed together. I stood near my horse, tightening a strap, watching it all unfold like a bad vision from a night fire. Custer didn't consult the scouts again. He didn't ask what we'd seen or what we feared. He just gave orders. Reno would take one group, Benteen another. Custer himself would lead the third. He said the separation was to surround the enemy, but I knew better. So did the others. This wasn't strategy. This was arrogance. This was a man chasing glory before the dust even settled. Crooked Horn stood beside me, quiet, his face unreadable. But I knew that look. It was the look of someone who sees a buffalo charging and knows there's no time to move. Charlie Reynolds mounted up, but his eyes never left the ridge behind us. Bloody Knife said nothing, just checked his rifle one last time. And me. I stood there with a note still fresh in my memory, one I had written like fire to deliver, and watched it crumble under the weight of certainty. Not ours. His. Custer moved like a man already writing his legacy. Sharp, decisive, blind. The scouts weren't given new roles, just told to ride with the nearest group. Observers now, not voices, not warnings. I was told to stay back, watch the horses. Red Star, the runner, now the bystander. The one who saw everything first and now would see it last. I watched as they mounted. One group headed south, another west. Custer's group turning toward the valley, where the smoke had been, where the truth waited. I watched until the last hat dipped below the hill, until the sounds of hooves faded into silence, and then I just stood there, the reins in my hand and the weight of being right pressed hard on my chest. The camp behind me was still unnaturally so, a kind of quiet that settles not from peace but from something being off. I walked to the edge of a small rise and looked out over the open land. No movement, just wind and distant hills. But I knew what sat beyond them. I had seen the smoke, the horses, the signs, the warnings. I had seen everything, and now all I could do was wait. time stretched, long and uneasy. Some of the other scouts remained nearby, tending gear, watching clouds. No one spoke. No one needed to. We all knew what had just happened. We'd been cut out of the story. And when men like Custer cut you out of the story, they do it in ink. Permanent, bold, unapologetic. Crooked Horn paced for a while, then sat beneath a tree, sharpening a knife that probably didn't need sharpening. Bloody Knife crouched low eyes, fixed westward body still, but coiled like something waiting to strike. And me, I counted breaths again. 1, 2, 3. A habit I couldn't shake. Then far in the distance I thought I heard it. A dull echo. Not thunder, not wind. Something heavier, rhythmic. Gunfire, distant, faint, but real. I turned toward the sound, my entire body alert, but no one moved. Not yet. Not until we were sure. Then came another sound. Closer this time. A rider, fast pushing his horse hard across the plain. Dust kicked up behind him like a tail. We all rose as one. The rider came in shouting, breath, ragged eyes wide. "They've engaged," he said. "The general's column is cut off. Reno is under fire. The Sioux are everywhere." The words hit like a slap. No formation, no preparation. Just panic like a wave crashing through the center of everything. Bloody Knife cursed under his breath. Crooked Horn stood slowly, already reaching for his gear. The Crow scouts began moving too, not waiting for orders. We didn't need 'em. We had known this was coming. We just hadn't known how fast it would fall apart. We didn't ride into the battle. We rode into the aftermath. Into smoke and silence and bodies already still. The ridge we had once climbed for vision now stood behind us like a monument to warnings unheard. I was among the last to arrive. Red Star, the scout who had once raced through the dark to deliver a message no one wanted. Now, I stood in daylight watching the price of their disbelief spread across the earth in blood and silence. The grass was trampled, the air burned, and scattered across the slope were uniforms, torn limbs bent wrong, and faces I would never forget. I recognized horses, gear rifles, familiar things made foreign by death. I saw Charlie Reynolds' coat soaked in dark, Bloody Knife sash near a body I didn't want to name. I didn't find Custer, not then, not directly, but I saw the circle, the way the ground was disturbed. I saw the line where he made his stand, or tried to. I saw the hill where hope had run dry. There were no survivors from his group, not one. Not even the bravest, not even the cruelest. Just stillness. Echoes. The crows circling above. The wind didn't speak, but it carried everything we hadn't said fast and far. We helped gather what we could. Horses, bodies, memories. I worked with my hands, but my heart was far away. Somewhere between that first ridge and this last moment. Somewhere in the silence after Crooked Horn stopped humming. I never heard him sing again after that day. None of us did. Big Belly didn't speak either. He looked over the valley and shook his head once like someone closing a door too late. Back at camp, no one asked what we had seen. No one asked what we had warned. They called it Custer's Last Stand. They gave it a name before they ever understood it. They built monuments, carved stone, and told stories of bravery. But they left us out. Not by accident. They remembered the men who died, but not the ones who saw it coming. I am Red Star. I rode through the night to save them. I stood on the ridge and watched the future burn. And still, no one listened. but maybe now you have. I don't tell this story for revenge. I don't carry bitterness in my saddlebag, but I do carry memory. I carry the weight of being right and the shame of being powerless. Of knowing we shouted through every sign, we had smoke patterns, zigzag trails, songs swallowed in the dark, and still it wasn't enough. We weren't soldiers. We were scouts. That meant we saw what others didn't. But in their eyes, that also meant we couldn't lead, couldn't command, couldn't know better. We were to find, not to speak. And if we spoke, we were to be ignored. It would have been easier to forget, to bury it like they buried the bodies quickly without ceremony. But the land doesn't forget, and neither do I. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Custer had looked me in the eye and listened, truly listened. Would the ridge still be red? Would the valley still echo with ghosts? Or would those 600 men be fathers, brothers, husbands instead of names etched into cold monuments? No one visits in winter. I stayed on a while after. Rode where they told me, scoped where they pointed. But something in me had shifted. Not broken, just quiet. The others changed too. Crooked Horn never again rode out first. Big Belly returned to his people and stopped speaking the language of the army. And me, I learned that seeing the future doesn't mean you can change it, especially when pride rides faster than truth. So now, when I stand on high ground and see smoke in the distance, I don't speak loud. I don't run fast. I just watch. And I wait. Because I've seen what happens when a warning arrives and the world closes its ears. And that's why I tell you now. Not so you remember my name, but so next time when someone like me rides through the night breathless and broken carrying truth in their hands, maybe you'll stop. Maybe you'll listen. Maybe the smoke won't become fire. Maybe history doesn't have to repeat itself again. Maybe.